Oh, hey, we're live now on twitter.com/SPSM chat. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You wouldn't believe the hurdles we had to get through to get to all of you out there. First and foremost, Chris, people that are joining us already, let me know one of you, or people watching, but specifically one of you watching, Chrissie, Joelle, or Marie, let us know that we're on Twitter right now and that we're all good to go. And I'll give time for people to join us and join in the conversation. SPSM chat, August 11th, 2019, Sunday, 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time, 7 p.m. Mountain time. And we're talking about hashtag OCD and suicide risk, something I believe has never been discussed before in as detail as we're going to talk about it as tonight in SPSM chat history. So it looks like we're good to go, right, everyone?
Yes.
We're good on Twitter?
Happening at the same. Yeah.
Okay, so before people start giving me grief, I will pin this Periscope right to the top of the profile so that way everyone can see us and they don't see last week's pin to the top. Okay,
right.
So let's get down to business. If you're watching this live on twitter.com/SPSM chat or on Periscope, that's totally cool too. Let us know that you're here. We have questions, like real questions this week about OCD, and they're scheduled. So I think the first one is coming up at 6:10. So here are our panelists, Joelle Marie Nourse and Marie Shanley, aka Anxiety, and our guest, Chrissie Hodges, is going to talk about all the cool things that she does, and specifically OCD, suicide, which she has presented alongside with Joelle Marie Nourse at the American Association of Suicidology conference. So she knows her shit. Without further ado, who is Chrissie Hodges?
Again, loaded question. Rudy, thank you so much for having me on here. As always, I always love being part of your advocacy. Thank you so much to the panel, to trusting my experience and knowledge of living with OCD to be able to contribute to this topic. I am a mental health advocate specifically for OCD, and then even farther, I talk a lot about the nicknamed pure OCD, which is going to be mental or intrusive thoughts that are distressing followed by mental rituals. I wrote a book about it. It's called Pure OCD, The Invisible Side of Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. And what I do in this field for mental health is that I'm a certified peer support specialist here in Colorado. And I work with individuals worldwide, providing consultation to connect them to OCD therapists, because therapy is a specialized field when it comes to OCD. So I can do that worldwide for people, and I also provide peer supports in any stage that someone is working through, and that just helps to normalize what someone's going through, not only the symptoms, but the emotional turmoil we feel in living with OCD, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little later. And then lastly, my company also owns the government contract that puts peer support specialists in the state institutions at Colorado, which are the state institution at Pueblo and the state institution at Fort Logan. So that is in a nutshell who Chrissie Hodges is.
Well, I appreciate you, Chrissie. So let's go check the Twitter chat now and see what we got here. I have you know, I spent the past 4 or 5 hours today creating graphics and overlays, and I could not get any of them to play with all of you as well. I can only do it with just... I couldn't... Don't get me started on that. So... I don't
so sorry, Rudy.
I don't want a sob story. Hey, Barrett, how you doing? Hey, Anxiety, how are you doing? Hey, Grace Durbin, how are you doing? Finally showed up today. Where is the SPSM crowd? Where are the cookies? I think that was Hudson's job this week. So we talked about Chrissie, and the first question is coming up. And I want to make sure that it's an interactive one. So question one. Really, really low rent. That's the only way you're going to get it. But it is on the SPSM chat Twitter account. So if you're not following the SPSM chat Twitter account, I have no idea how you found us in the first place. So, question one: how have you seen OCD represented or talked about in social media? And make sure that when you're replying to it, or you can do your own tweet, it doesn't matter, or quote tweet. Make sure to use the hashtag SPSM on all of your tweets. All of them. But for the question one, just reply to it with A1. So A1 for Q1, and then we go on to question two, do A2, and so on and so forth. So question one is, how have you seen OCD represented or talked about in social media? And before I get to any tweeters out there, we're going to go to our distinguished panel and guests. So you are on, Joelle Marie Nourse. How have you seen OCD represented or talked about in social media?
A lot of different ways. So usually it's not, I feel like it's definitely not represented accurately most of the time. And I pretty much never see, it talked about in the context of suicide, to be honest. Most of the time I see things like a picture of a bunch of crayons almost in rainbow order, and then, one crayon out of place, out of the rainbow order, and people saying, I'm so OCD. Like, there are hashtags, I'm so OCD, or so OCD, or oh my God, OCD, things like that. And that's, that really perpetuates stigma, and it perpetuates this, this idea that OCD is quirky, or it's not a very, or even disabling, diagnosis or circumstance for someone. And that's typically what I see in social media. That's even what I see in advertising, that OCD is quirky. It's kind of almost fun to have. It's what makes you interesting, and it's not disabling, and it's not actually a threat to someone's life, which is the actual reality.
Marie, what say you to that, and what say you in your own words?
I kind of very much agree with that. It's usually used very colloquially. Unfortunately, like a lot of mental illnesses are. And I actually did a quick Google search for what pops up if you type in fictional characters with OCD. And all of them made me cringe really hard. So let's go through them. We have Adrian Monk of the TV show Monk, which I would argue probably makes the most sense of the list. And then you have Melvin Udall of As Good as It Gets, which is Jack Nicholson plays him. And that's actually, I've also seen, from what I understand, also fairly good representation. But then they also put down Monica Geller. And I was like, that is absolutely everything. Like, she's a neat freak and she likes things a specific way. And they're like, well, let's label her. So just cringe, a lot of cringe as expected. But yeah, a lot of it is, one of the things that I've heard a lot is, oh, I check my alarm a few times before I go to sleep. I'm so OCD. And one of the things I remember in college that I learned that blew my mind was that you could have no, and obviously Chrissie can correct me, but you can have no physical symptoms going on of like counting 1, 2, 3, but your thoughts could be looping, and like how you think in your mind could be looping. So it can be completely invisible to people, but you could still be experiencing it. And obviously, like Joelle said, it can be very debilitating. So for somebody to be like Monica Geller, who's like a neat freak, she's such, that's just perpetuating misconceptions, and that's frustrating as with any illness, but especially if considering this one can be connected to suicide, it gets actually scary and dangerous more so.
Well, I guess I should give my response. So I can't really say enough about what you have said, because you pretty much have all hit it on the nail. But yeah, no, I mean, really, like, what I see in social media is all awful. I mean, I see the good from Chrissie and Joelle, and there's a lot of amazing OCD advocates who often get left out of the greater mental health advocacy community. because it's not seen as a serious mental illness or it's a joke. It's something to be laughed at. And that's really unfortunate because, as we're talking about today, suicide is very real. And for me, if suicide is one of the results, then that's pretty serious, mental illness or not. So we need to be talking more about that and fighting against the misrepresentation, because I think that's one of our goals of a mental health advocate, no matter what your condition label is that we fight against misrepresentation, we fight against discrimination, and we fight to have our human rights that we deserve, that are our rights, to be maintained and upheld. So, Chrissie, do you want to follow up on any of that?
Absolutely. And I'm going to resist the urge to talk about every single point and take up the rest of the however long we have.
That makes my job easier.
Yes, OCD does not just have physical compulsions. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of OCD, when in fact a large majority of people are suffering with mental compulsions. This can come in the form of rumination, mental reviewing, avoidance, and these are in response to thoughts that are so distressing that I've written down here quotes from people that I have worked with that I've heard over and over and over. OCD is like a mental prison. OCD beats me up every day. It's like facing an abuser. I live in a torture chamber. So people who are experiencing this on a daily basis, clicking onto their social media and finding a meme that says, I want to have an OCD party so everybody comes over to my house and cleans it up for me. I mean, fuck that person, A. And B, it's also equating the feeling in the person that they don't really have OCD, because social media tends to drive OCD is only cleaning and organizing, which is not the full truth of this disorder. So while it comes across so much that OCD is this quirky illness that everybody has a little bit of, you would never hear me going around saying I have a little bit of diabetes and making me so funny, or a little bit of cancer, because I think it's just going to, lighten everyone's day to make fun of someone's debilitating illness. Because my final comment to this is it takes 12 to 14 years for someone who has OCD that does not present in outward compulsions, 12 to 14 years to find a diagnosis, and then longer to get appropriate treatment. Why? A lot of it is because the media drives false narratives about what OCD is, and then when people do find out it is OCD, they've become so trivialized and then feel like they are so weak that they dig even deeper and double down in the stigma and won't ask for help. So if you take anything away from this video, stop saying you're so OCD, A, and B, call people out when they're sharing memes that can harm people and drive them to suicide. Those are my thoughts.
Now, this is going to bleed into our next Twitter chat question, which should be coming up in the next 2 minutes. This is SPSM chat, which has been going on for, I believe, about 6 years at this point. Suicide prevention, social media. So, above all else, we're talking about suicide. So, you've done your research. You've presented on this multiple times. What are the facts and figures? Break it down for the people watching at home or tweeting at SPSM chat on Twitter. What are the facts and figures and myths regarding suicide related to OCD? Chrissie.
So there was this is a tough question to answer, because we don't have any real data on statistics, and I'll just go ahead and tell you why. Why? Because therapists aren't educated on what OCD really is. And Joelle, I'm sure that you can back me up on this. Mm-hmm. Most therapists don't understand that OCD can manifest in a way where you don't have physical compulsions. So if they're not educated, then they're not diagnosing people correctly, which was one of the biggest obstacles in the field of treating OCD. Again, people very privy to this information. someone who goes to someone and says, I have thoughts of harming someone else, or I have sexual thoughts that are distressing and disturbing to me, and they're causing me anxiety. A therapist is not going to recognize that this is OCD. So they're going to go, oh, you have generalized anxiety disorder. So let's just put that down in your chart. And that goes into the statistics of GAD, not OCD. So in reality, all of the statistics about how common and prevalent OCD is are incorrect. Why? Because therapists in the field are not educated, A, on how OCD manifests, B, how to treat it, and C, the media, to tie back in, is not pushing the narrative of what OCD really is. And so that further makes this problem an issue. So we can't really even correlate actual statistics because we don't really even know how many people have OCD because it's getting misdiagnosed so much. A recent study just came out, and if I could remember correctly, it said that it was 30%, don't quote me on that, I just skimmed the article, something like 30% of people claimed that they had suicidal ideation, contemplation, or attempts. Every therapist that I have talked to and about this specific topic says that upwards of 80% of their clientele, if not more, have said they have thought about suicide, they have contemplated it, or they are thinking about it because they need to escape the mental torture. And I will say a vast majority of people I meet with tell me that they feel the same way too. They're also scared to tell anybody that they are because they're afraid they'll be involuntary committed, and then they have to tell people what their OCD is and then get a diagnosis that doesn't fit, and yada, 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 yada. So see the problem here?
No, I hear you. And like I said, that kind of leads us into our next Twitter chat question, and that is, which is now on the SPSM chat Twitter page, question 2, why are people with OCD at a high suicide risk? And again, if you're following along on the Twitter chat, just reply to that question or quote tweet it and start it off with A2 to correspond with question 2, and then followed by your answer. So that question is, why are people with OCD at a high suicide risk? And before I bring it back to you, Chrissie, who obviously knows the answer, let's go with Marie.
That's what I'm like.
Hopefully you know the answer.
Yeah. I mean, my assumption is from what I understand and from what I have, I remember listening to a podcast on NPR, and they were specifically talking about the fact that the internal intrusive thoughts, so, and Chrissie mentioned it, is when somebody is continuously thinking, what if I go and kill this person, and thinks of different methods of doing it. And those thoughts are incredibly intrusive and terrifying. And they talked about the type of therapy, which I cannot recall, which ended up helping them.
Social response prevention.
But yeah, so it's terrifying. I mean, put myself necessarily in the, but I can try to imagine. I mean, I suicidal ideation. So to imagine what it must feel like to think about harming another person over and over and seeing these disturbing images and not being able to get these thoughts out of my mind. I mean, we hear so many times, I see people being dismissive to other people who have mental illness and just being like, oh, just think about something else. Can't you just refocus your attention? Can't you just, just go and do something else? And with somebody with OCD, like that's just not possible. And so, obviously making sure that person gets to the therapy that they need to go to, would be probably, if somebody came to me with that issue, that would probably be the first thing I try to do the most, is to not pretend that, hey, this is serious and this is bothering you, and it's valid that this is on your mind, that this is intrusive, and it would be better if you talk to somebody and you can live a life where you can learn how to better handle this, right? I know OCD, just like most mental illnesses, is not exactly something you can cure, but getting somebody to therapy as soon as possible would be probably the best thing that you could do in suicide prevention.
Joelle Marie?
I think so. Definitely having, recurring thoughts, dealing with death of any kind is torturous and would be for anyone. And absolutely in OCD, it can be, unrelenting. but the little body of research that there is that has to do with suicide and OCD actually finds that if you take away that contributing factor of thoughts having to do with suicide and death, actually it's the OCD itself. And it doesn't really matter what the unrelenting thoughts are about and what the OCD theme is, just the fact of having OCD, which is so often posing to the kind of person you perceive yourself to be, can make one contemplate suicide, can make one want to not be here. So having these constant thoughts, no matter what they are, if they are that you might harm yourself, that you might harm someone else, if they are that you are simply a bad person, if they are that you cannot be perfect, if they are that you might be eating poisonous food, for example, any of these things that may not have to do particularly with death, that can lead to suicidal thoughts, that can lead to suicidality. So it's just the unrelenting, torturous feeling of having these thoughts come at you. Frequently they are ego dystonic, which is losing the kind of person you are and that you want to be, which is a kind of torture. So it's not necessarily that the person or that they're having a OCD theme of death or suicide. This is OCD itself. So, and I think that's important because I think, even therapists and who have some knowledge of OCD might zoom in on depression traits in addition to, and then only consider people with those depressive traits or people with certain themes of OCD as risks for suicide. But really just having OCD will increase your risk of suicide. Sometimes
Chrissie, this is kind of a wild card question because I actually saw a video that you did on this when I was doing my hard research, is OCD and fear of suicide. Now, is that different from actually wanting to die, or is this just like another OCD symptom, much like fear of being gay or what have you?
Yes, I'm glad that you brought this up because I think it's an important distinction, and a lot of people with OCD right now are probably watching this looking for reassurance on whether they're actually suicidal or not. Let me, if I may, I want to open this up and give a little bit of an understanding to people who may not understand what harm and sexual intrusive thoughts are. Important to make that distinction, especially after a week that we've had where violence and mental illness is getting like all intertwined. I want to make sure that everybody understands the big distinction about having a fear and intrusive thoughts and distressing thoughts versus someone who is actively pursuing something because it brings them pleasure. So if you don't know, OCD can take on a form, again, it's the nickname pure OCD, where individuals have intrusive thoughts of a distressing and disturbing nature. And oftentimes, and I was listening to a podcast by the brilliant Dr. Stephen Phillipson, who said the big three are sexual, violent, and blasphemous intrusive thoughts. These, if you think about this, all of us, every single person on the planet has intrusive thoughts. If you don't have OCD, you just don't often notice them. They come and go. They're a little distressing, like I'm driving down the road and I see someone on the side of the street. What if I just swerve and kill that person? You may have that thought and think, wow, that was bizarre, and you go along with your day. Someone with OCD will think, what if I swerve and kill that person? And then what happens is their brain malfunctions at that point and says, we have reason to feel alarmed. Why would you think that? They assign meaning to the thoughts, and then they try to find out why they had the thought. This is the pattern of OCD. Distressing thoughts, the only thing to relieve that is going to be a compulsion to try to prove or disprove that the thought isn't real, which gets you in this cycle that can last years and years and years and years and years. I want to talk a little bit about some of the most common ones. Harm OCD, of course, Rudy, what you just said, the fear that you are going to harm yourself, and that includes self-harm or that includes suicide. The fear that you're going to harm your loved ones. So this could turn into watching something on a mass shooting and you hear something, oh, no one ever saw anything about this person, and all of a sudden they snapped and started killing people. And that person with OCD will think, well, what if I could snap and kill someone? So then they start to monitor their behaviors, or they're starting to get anxiety around anything violent, or they get around their loved ones and think, what if I harm them? Sexual intrusive thoughts are going to include things like, what if I turn gay? And the opposite of that is someone who is gay. What if I turn straight? So kind of under the guise of sexual orientation OCD, the same as gender identity. So what if I turn trans? Now, remember that this is not a discriminatory fear. This is just out of the blue one day, I look at a chick, I think she's pretty, and I'm like, oh my God, why did I look at her boobs? Does that mean I'm gay? And then this thing spirals out of control, and then all day I'm checking and trying to figure this out. Another very common one is, and this is important to link to the suicide piece, is the fear of turning into a pedophile. Just like Joelle said earlier, OCD is ego dystonic, meaning we have insight that this doesn't align with our values or what we want, or any of that kind of stuff. So this is such a distressing thought for people. And it can happen just as simple as I'm changing the diaper of my newborn and I have to wipe my newborn's private parts, and I'm terrified that I accidentally just molested them. That distressing thought comes into someone's mind and they think to themselves, oh my gosh, what does that mean? Why would I even have that thought? Does that mean I really did it? Am I safe to be around my child? And you can see how that can spiral down a rabbit hole. And I'm going to tell you, people who have especially the theme of being a pedophile, they're not going to go readily to a therapist and be like, I have these thoughts. They're terrified their kids are going to be taken away from them. They're terrified they're going to be carted off to jail. And the fears feel real. We know, but it feels so real. And then we bounce back this volley of, what kind of person would have this kind of thought? I must be a monster. And so that's a roundabout way to come back to, yes, the harm OCD can absolutely come in the form of, I am worried that I'm going to kill myself. And a good way to look at this is going to be that, I don't want to say a good way to look at this, because feeling suicidal is very prevalent when you're living with OCD. However, the fear of suicide presents in a different manner. So it is this constant need to try to prove that you are or aren't in danger of attempting or suicide. And so if you are feeling this way, I would encourage you to see an OCD specialist. I can't say anything right here, that's going to reassure you or be able to flesh out whether you really do or don't have OCD. But I will say that it's a very, very common theme. That was a very long answer. I'm sorry, but I really wanted to clarify.
That's totally fine.
I wanted to clarify for people what harm and sexual intrusive thoughts are, because I think sometimes people get really confused.
Yeah, no, and I'm always learning something new from you, Chrissie, because, again, there's very, very small people who are talking about OCD from lived experience, especially pure OCD, like you are. So you're just a fountain of knowledge. And so definitely go check out Chrissie Hodges' YouTube channel, because she's always making videos educational about like every single OCD topic like you can think of. I think she's like basically like the great thing about Chrissie's YouTube channel is that if you're OCD, or if you think that you're might be having OCD, you type in a question in Google, and there's a good chance that Chrissie has done a video on it. So that's great.
I'm trying to leave no stones unturned.
Yeah, so before we get into the next Twitter chat question, I wanted to make sure, if you're just checking in right now, hey everyone, this is SPSM chat 3.0. I screwed it up. But basically, we're talking about suicide prevention, and we're doing it on social media. So SPSM chat, we're here every single Sunday. 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Rudy Caseres. Also on the panel today is Joelle Marie Nourse. Say hello.
Hi.
Marie Shanley, a.k.a. Anxiety, on Twitch.tv. And yes, Chrissie Hodges, that's you right there. And so if you're watching this live, let us know that you're here. We got Twitter chat questions going on. If you're watching on Periscope, that's totally cool as well. I know people just check out Periscope here and there. It's still a thriving platform, but we use this to live stream directly to Twitter. But if you're only on Periscope, that's totally fine as well. Still feel free to ask us questions or leave comments. I'll be able to see them on my software. So please, you are still seen if you're on only Periscope. We also upload these videos on YouTube about an hour or two after this ends. So if Twitter is not your jam, you can always go to YouTube, and I also upload the videos to Facebook, the SPSM Facebook account, and when in doubt, just go to spsmchat.com, and that way you'll be able to see all the videos going back years, and you'll have a blog that goes along with it, along with resources and citations and all that good stuff. So go check that all out after we're done, because let's get back to the conversation. This is the third Twitter chat question. How can you best support someone with OCD? This is question 3. So if you're following along the Twitter chat, reply starting with A3, and then your response, make sure to use the hashtag SPSM and use the hashtag OCD so other people in the OCD community on Twitter can find this chat as well and be a part of the conversation. So, again, how can you best support someone with OCD? Let's give it to Joelle.
So I think it can definitely vary. And I think, one of the things that we hit upon, that Chrissie hit upon is that it, first of all, therapy in particular, a lot of don't really understand complexities. And there are a lot of ways that therapists who are not trained, person, she talked about seeking reassurance and initiate kind of this cycle of reassurance seeking, and then you get that, and then you to get reassurance for these thoughts, and it becomes this vicious cycle kind of that is now not inside you, but it's outside of you, and you're actually increasing the struggle for someone. So if somebody has OCD, know it, to use reassurance about these thoughts, that they're a bad person or that they're harming you, or those are just examples. Try not to reassure them, but try to put it back on them. And that can be very somebody struggling, having emotional pain in front of them. But, and I think Chrissie can probably have better examples, specific examples on how to do that. But I would say, tell them to just think about what they think about themselves, and not really engage further into that process. So that's an example. And second of all, talking about supporting, I want to address the issue where there's a lot of people on Instagram, a lot of people on social media who say they are OCD gurus, OCD counselors, things like that, and they are not trained how to approach people, and they do things like give out their personal number, have OCD therapy sessions, and it is incredibly harmful because they do things like offer reassurance constantly, and it's just very, very harmful. And what it does is it puts people in a place where they develop this feedback loop with this person who is offering support, and then the person who has reached them via social media can fall off. And suddenly this person who's experiencing OCD loses the support and loses the structure that they have gained through this person who has no training. So it's very, very harmful, and it's a trend I've seen. Me and others may or may not be on this chat with me. And if you do see that, a way to support people with OCD is to not necessarily call it out, but start conversation. And that's
Marie.
Thank you for saying it.
My entire body is in so much pain just listening to you talk about the fact that there are advocates out there. And I know this might not even be about, this is about suicide prevention for sure, but it might not even be about OCD, just the fact that there are advocates out there who are doing more harm than good. Just be aware of where you're getting your information from. Always ask for sources. Always ask them like again, sources, maybe ask them to point you to a professional that they got their information from. Never take something at face value. Any advocate worth their salt will be able to point you at least in the direction of resources that you can rely on. So that's like number one of prevention, because it frustrates me to no end how some advocates can make the rest of us look bad by doing exactly what Joelle is saying and providing like one-on-one therapy. Anyway, so that's clearly like a triggering thing for me, so we're gonna move away from that. But what else you can do, it's very similar to, so I live with somebody who has OCD and anxiety, and the way that we constantly go back and forth is it's exactly what Joelle said. Also, it's challenging. It's not saying, the big thing with my significant other is their food and how they feel about food. And so it's constantly being like, oh, I don't think this is safe. Okay. Do you not think that that's safe? Do you think that that's your OCD saying that? Or do you think that, why is this food not? Let's follow through that process. I need you to through it, and then to have them take a step back and say, okay, no, I know that's just a thought, that's not a so to go through. But that was all training that happened with a professional psychologist through years and years of going through it, and then teaching me how to properly support them. That was not something that I like went and looked up in a book and was like, this is how we're going to do it from now on. And I think the most important thing is, and this goes for every mental illness, again, any mental health issue, just don't be presumptuous. The way you think about this issue, this ailment, is not going to be the same way that this person sees it. If it was as simple as saying, well, look at it logically, look at it this way, nobody would have any mental illness, because it's not logical. It's, what's going on, and you're continuing to go down that path because you can't help yourself. So, saying like, hey, that's wrong, just like, don't think that way. That's not helpful. That's not accomplishing anything, right? So creating an environment in which it might get frustrating. And I say this as somebody who, like we don't go to movie theaters. We don't eat out at certain places because of very specific, like how things are ritualized. So it gets very frustrating to be on the other side of that, on that supporting end. But at the end of the day, I have to go back to myself and say, like, I'm not living with this. So whatever I think is tough for me is 4 times as tough for this person. And at the end of the day, I love them. And if you can't provide that, it's okay to remove yourself for a little bit, give yourself a little bit of self-care and support, and then come back to the situation when you feel better. And I feel like that's just general advice for any dealing with anybody with any mental health issue, but it definitely applies with OCD and those things that are just like Joelle said, frustrating to watch. It's hard to see somebody suffering through that way and knowing you can't do anything to just go, I'm just going to take this thought and pluck it out of your head. All right, it's gone. Cool. Your OCD's done. But yeah, so that's my long spiel. Thank you. Do
you want to jump in on this, Chrissie Hodges? At Piro Chrissie.
Of course. And thank y'all both for bringing this up. My rule of thumb to try to talk, it's hard because in someone that's doing peer support, I'm certified, I have a supervisor, I've gone through all the training. And so when I see people out there saying that they're doing peer support, they have zero training, and they're exchanging money with people, you're putting lives at risk. And I know that as a peer support too. If I'm not doing continued education, if I'm not having someone, help to guide me, I'm putting lives at risk. So if you're exchanging money with someone for help, make sure that you ask for their credentials, make sure that you ask about their training, and make sure that that is something that you're not just doing out of desperation and that they just have this bait and hook. There are a lot of people out there that have spent the time training and they're there to help you. So seek those people out. It's okay to ask, by the way. My thoughts on this. Just to kind of piggyback on this, the biggest thing is definitely what Marie said, like, believe someone. If you don't have OCD, it's going to be real hard for you to understand what it's like if I am sitting there going, I'm so terrified after I ate that chicken that I'm going to throw up. My fiance Sean is like, oh, his A response is going to be, oh, don't worry, it's fine. I ate it too. That's not a healthy response. because it's just going to fuel me even more. It's not healthy in terms of OCD. Normal people without OCD, sure, that might calm them for a minute, but I'm in a spiral, and he sees that spiral. And so he believes me that I am in a spiral and I don't know how to stop it. So that's where he has to dig down deep in his own tools of what he knows about OCD and chooses how he's going to support me, which is let's stop the compulsions. And one of those is stop asking me whether you're going to get sick, because no matter what he says, I'm not listening. And we can go into that later about exposure response prevention. So A, believe when someone's struggling. The problem with OCD is that people will finally open up to their loved ones and say, I have intrusive thoughts. And a loved one might go, they're going to think in their brain, oh, they just have a couple thoughts per day. No. OCD intrusive thoughts are 24/7. I think it was mentioned earlier in what someone was saying. You cannot, we don't get to stop it. At the end of the day of OCD work and put our feet up and pour a glass of wine and be like, hey, I'm done for the day. Let's relax. OCD is right along there going, pour me a glass too. Like, it stays with us 24/7, and it's so difficult to be able to communicate to that, so especially with these taboo thoughts. I'm worried I'm attracted to a family member. 24/7. You don't want to communicate that to people because you're afraid they're going to think you're nuts, but you're stuck in that cycle. So I just want to ask, or I just want to emphasize, believe people with the struggle. Believe that they're going through that. Take it seriously, y'all. OCD is a major mental illness. It's often looked at as an a la carte mental illness. Oh, this person has the major mental illness over here, and then, and then some depression with that. Oh, and then they have a little OCD. We're just like the sideshow, a little on top of that. No, live with this. It's huge. It hurts. So take it seriously. If you are living with someone with OCD, here are my 2 suggestions. A, educate yourself. Go to, and we can throw these out, on a later, is OCDonline.com, OCD Baltimore, intrusivethoughts.org, and find John Hirschfield's book, When a Family Member Has OCD. Again, John Hirschfield, When a Family Member Has OCD. Practical tips, education, and understanding of what your loved one is going through and how you can help them instead of enable them.
Before we get into our last question, I wanted to get back to Joelle Marie because she wanted to bring up a point. But the last question is, by the way, is how have your views changed on OCD this evening while watching this SPSM chat? So if it did any of you guess, by all means, let us know. But back to you, Joelle.
I think, Chrissie definitely touched upon this when she was just speaking, but I just want to make sure we bring it back and make it more clear about how OCD can bring somebody to like a crisis point. And a lot of it is what Chrissie said, not taking people seriously. This is real fear. This is not, and I think there is a lack of connect and lack of understanding. When I am saying I am afraid, this is a real fear. When people are not understanding what is going on with someone with OCD, because you can't understand what's going on in their head. This is a 24/7 process of torture that they are going through. Mild OCD can possibly be up to 8 hours of a person's day, waking hours of them just constantly going through these processes, these painful processes, dealing with these thoughts. And that is painful, it's exhausting, and then trying to tell somebody about that and having them not believe you is crushing. And so I think it's really important to understand that having these painful things go on inside of you, trying to seek help, having somebody tell you it's quirky, seeing that all over social media, that this painful, disruptive, debilitating thing is a quirk or is not that big of a deal, is an a la carte add-on issue, but really what are you here for, is what is driving people to want to not be here. And then they are really being taken advantage of by people who want more followers or people who want to be known as the helpers, but they really don't have the information to do so appropriately. And then they are just dropped when these people on Instagram or these people on social media feel like they just have too much on their plates. So I think it's really important to believe people, like Chrissie said, to understand what a person's limits are and to let them make those boundaries for themselves and to get professional help, to get people how to support, because these crisis situations happen because we're not listening to people, not believing them, and not understanding that this is real fear, this is real terror, and these are real crises. I just wanted to emphasize that.
Yeah, no, and this question is for you, Marie, because we had Joelle and Chrissie who have OCD, and you mentioned that you had a partner with OCD. Has this past hour, I guess, 45 minutes, has this changed anything about your views on OCD or OCD and suicide?
I mean, I definitely, honestly, until this point, even though I live with somebody who has OCD, I never really sat down to think about the suicidality of the diagnosis, mostly because it's always been something that's been obstructive in our lives. This is, again, personal experience. I would never downplay anybody's experience, but it's always been something that's definitely been obstructive in our lives, but it's never been something, I've not heard my partner ever tell me that they didn't want to live because they were so tired of experiencing the intrusive thoughts at the rate they were. So listening to that side of it and listening to the suicide prevention aspect of it and listening to the depth of how different people live with different types of OCD, that's always enlightening. And I love hearing that. And the fact that there's a book out there that I had no idea about, and I've been living with this person for 10 years. So I'm going to be picking that right up. Yeah, that's a huge difference. So, I mean, we're always learning, we're always evolving, and we're always figuring something out. And I'm honored that we were able to talk to Chrissie and pick her brain and get new info out there.
Yes. We are definitely very, very blessed to have Chrissie Hodges at Piro Chrissie on Twitter. And we've come to final thoughts. And this goes without saying. I don't think I need too much explanation for this. But we've been talking about OCD, suicide risk, and lots of other cool stuff, I guess you can say. So anything that you want to touch upon, this goes for Joelle, Marie, and Chrissie, and everyone out there watching on Twitter and Periscope, or if you're watching on YouTube and Facebook and want to leave a comment there, I check those out as well. Final thoughts. Let's start with Joelle.
I think we did touch upon a lot of things, including, definitely how to support people with OCD. I think it's very important for not only if you have friends and family, but if you are a clinician, if you are a provider, if you are a professional in a helper position of any sort, to understand where your limits are. And that's not just with OCD. That's with any type of issue you're trying to help people with. But I'm going to say in particular with OCD, because there are certain ways that you can really stress and push someone with OCD that can really backfire. And that can lead to more intense crises. And again, it's just important to listen and believe people when they tell you what's going on internally, when there are things that you cannot yourself observe. You just have to trust that they are experiencing these things that are painful and that are difficult, and honor that. And then you can help them.
Back to you, Marie.
My closing thoughts are going to go back to just believing, right, and not, just by that person's side and going, I don't know what it's like to be you, but I will be there for you while you're going through this thing, is more than, it's not something that everybody can do, and I think that's totally understandable, but, making sure that you are there for those people who are experiencing OCD, and you don't question them, and you don't, not in terms of you don't question them and you don't doubt that what they're going through is a real thing. Doing your own research, maybe you can approach somebody, a therapist, like if you know somebody. Now I know Chrissie, but if you know somebody who can maybe give you a few answers to questions, look them up. Where again, there's a huge network through SPSM of clinicians and professionals that you can look through and see. A lot of people will post this in their Instagram profiles and figure out, make those connections. If this is important to you to learn more about, go out there and get that information for yourself, and then that will make you ultimately a better helper for people that, again, you might not be able to put yourself exactly in their shoes, but you can be compassionate and you can empathize.
Chrissie Hodges, our very special guest, coming all the way from Colorado.
Yes. Yes, I didn't realize it was getting dark too, so I hope you can still see me.
Yeah, that's one of the fun things about doing these evenings.
I have 1,000 concluding thoughts, but I'll just narrow it down to a few. The problem with having OCD is, especially the type of OCD where you have mental rituals and intrusive thoughts, is that there's not enough information out there. Like Rudy said, I'm one of the only people that's really out there talking about the gruesome details. So people live for years and years and years because it feels so real, and it doesn't, I know this is going to sound weird, but you don't feel like it's a mental illness because it's ego dystonic. You don't have any clue that there's something wrong, that it can be diagnosable and it can be treatable. You don't know that because it feels so real, because like Joelle said, it's so steeped in fear. So the problem is that people live for years hiding what they think is just a character flaw, when in reality it's a malfunction of your brain that can be treated by changing behavior through exposure response prevention therapy. I get emails more often than I want to that say, I was going to kill myself this weekend, and I finally decided to just throw in something on Google because I've been too afraid before, and your video came up. And now I know I have OCD and I can get help. It breaks my heart, but I'm so excited that they found the video. But I think, how many people out there are we losing? I almost died by suicide from OCD at age 20. I'd been living with it for 12 years, and I thought suicide was my only way out because I thought I was just such an awful person that I couldn't even type into AOL at that time what my fear was because I was so scared. I get comments on YouTube all the time, this video saved my life. And this is not just about me, it's just about people are desperate and people are dying. When I see an article about someone who had the greatest life ever, this was just like me at 20. I was all-star student, athlete, I was in college, I had everything going for me, and then I attempted suicide. Everybody was like, what? When I see articles about people that died that had the perfect lives and no one knew, I think to myself, oh my God, did they have OCD? And they were just too scared to ask. My desperate plea to you, if you are watching this, is find out what OCD is. Educate people you know. Say you saw this cool podcast and all of a sudden you found out this information, because you never know who you talk to when you say this. They could be suffering and contemplating suicide, and you could save their life. So those are my final thoughts. And the reason why is because I have been the face of death because of OCD. And many, many, many of my clients have too. But we're never going to know it as long as we drive this narrative that OCD is quirky and funny. Everybody has a little bit of it. And it's not a serious mental illness, because it is. So thank you for having me here today to be able to share that. It's always such a pleasure.
How can people connect with you?
They don't connect with me on Twitter because I'm never on there, y'all. I can't do the Twitter.
Twitter is stress. It's stress personified. I won't argue.
Except for Sunday evenings.
So if you want to check out my YouTube channel, it's Chrissie Hodges, Pure OCD Advocate. email me at ocd.chrissie@gmail.com. ChrissieHodges.com is my website, or you can connect with me on Facebook at Treatment for OCD, or on Instagram at PureOChrissie.
Thank you so much, Chrissie Hodges. I really appreciate you, and we're going to try to do what we did last week, and we're going to do the Brady Bunch goodbye. So we're going to add on Joelle, we're going to add on Marie, and then we're going to add on Chrissie. So thank you again. I really appreciate you all. This is week 2 of the new SPSM chat, and it's going to be a fun ride. We're going to have guests every single Sunday, and I can't thank you enough for the people who have joined us, who have been here from the very beginning, it seems like. I want to give special shout outs to Youth Mental Health Canada. Glad you were able to find us this week. Roving social worker Jay, I appreciate you retweeting everything. Grace Durbin, you should get the MVP award for tonight. Thank you so much for all your comments. She even went through the effort of quote tweeting people who were replying to her, because she's got like 100,000 followers with the hashtag SPSM. So I appreciate you, and that's going to do it for this week. Again, if you missed this live, you can still see it. It's pinned to the SPSM chat Twitter page, but you can also go to the YouTube channel. Just type in SPSM. You can also go to facebook.com/SPSM. You can see this week's, when I get around to it, and last week's episode, and every future episode after that, and SPSMchat.com, where we're going to upload a blog that goes along with this stream as well, with the resources we talked about. Thank you all. Wave goodbye, everyone. Keep your piggies safe.
Keep your piggies safe.